More from the animated series. This is episode 20.
You're listening to 70s Trek with Bob Turner and Kelly Casto, the fan podcast that looks at Star Trek in the 1970s. It was the decade that built a franchise.
Welcome to 70s Trek. I hope you have your favorite bowl handy with your cereal nearby. You know, I used to be a dry Count Chocula man myself, but now I'm more of a Raisin Bran guy. I don't know why. But we are going back to Saturday morning again. I'm Bob Turner.
And I'm Kelly Casto. This week, we're exploring the final frontier of kids' shows. Some more, as we continue our look at the animated series.
I do love me some TAS, huh? But first, let's talk about how you can reach us. We have a Facebook page. It's at facebook.com/70s Trek. Leave us a comment or a question because we'd love to hear your 70s Trek memories.
You can also find us on iTunes, of course. Just search for 70s Trek in the podcast area. Do us a favor, leave us a rating or a review. That helps other Trek fans find our show.
Mego presents the Star Trek action figures featuring the crew of the Enterprise. Captain James T. Kirk, their fearless leader. Dr. Bones McCoy, caring for the health of the Enterprise crew. Scotty, the chief engineer, in charge of the transporter room. Mr. Spock, the Vulcan, second in command. And the Klingon, enemy of the Star Trek crew. Star Trek action figures, complete with accessories shown. Each sold separately from Mego.
Don't you love that? Mr. Spock, the Vulcan.
The Vulcan.
I love the 70s commercials. You know, I wanted to start this segment off just kind of talking about what was going on. Some of the top songs in 1973, they include Elton John's Crocodile Rock, Billy Preston's Will It Go Round in Circles. Remember that song? Will it go round in circles? Yeah, okay.
You're so vain.
And You're So Vain by Carly Simon. Thank you so much. And some of the top TV shows that our parents were watching include Maude, Sanford and Son, and All in the Family. That was a big favorite in my house. But if you were a kid in 1973, you were probably watching on Saturdays Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids. Remember that one?
I love Fat Albert.
Who's going to do it, you or me? Scooby-Doo. Of course, who didn't watch Scooby-Doo? And of course, Star Trek. Star Trek, the animated series, that is.
I love all those shows.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they're awesome. Well, let's get into it, I guess. Just like last week, Bob and I are going to each talk about a handful of episodes.
Why don't you go ahead and go first?
All right. Well, I'm going to start with, and this is probably my favorite episode of all of the animated series, Yesteryear.
I love that one too.
So Yesteryear, let me get into the story and then I'm going to talk about some of the interesting tidbits. Kirk and Spock, along with some Starfleet historians, they're coming back through the Guardian of Forever. They were on a time-traveling research mission. They come through, that everybody one at a time come through. Kirk comes through. He's like, oh, it was so exciting, you know, all of this. And Spock comes through and Bones goes, Jim, who's this?
Yeah.
And they're like, Kirk's like, you know, this is Spock.
Yeah.
I've never met him.
I thought this was very clever, what they did in Yesteryear. And it links so nicely to the original series too.
It does. And throughout the series later on, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. All right. So the point is somehow they changed time, but they didn't do anything to change time. And it was really interesting that the point was they changed time because Spock was in two places at the same time. I think is how it worked.
It's Saturday morning.
Yeah, it's kind of weird, but they were observing the birth of the Orion civilization, basically. And I guess, he couldn't have because he couldn't be in two places at once. Well, it turns out that he had gone back into time previously to save his 7-year-old self from I forget the name of the monster, but like I said, I'm butchering this.
But basically it was a time loop, and
it was a time loop.
Spock
right.
was fulfilling, or was supposed to fulfill, his role in the time loop that he didn't know he was supposed to, right?
Exactly. And since he didn't, what happened is, time, goes a different path. And so he dies as a 7-year-old Vulcan. His parents can't handle it, and Amanda and Sarek break up, and Amanda dies in a shuttle accident.
What was the name of the Andorian? And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Who was the Andorian in this episode? Do you remember his name?
Thielen?
Okay. I always
Thelin.
I always felt bad for him.
I did too.
He kind of shows up and, he's the second in command. And then everybody says, yeah, Spock, you should go do this. And then this guy will be gone. Yeah,
I understand the ramifications. At the end of the day, I'm not going to know anyway. So right. I support you going back and saving your 7-year-old self, which saves your mom.
Right. And I've never met you before, but sure, go ahead.
Yeah, right. So like I said, I really cut through this pretty quick. Obviously, he corrects time, and he goes back, and basically he's Selleck. He's a relative of his dad, Sarek, and he saves his younger self, teaches him his younger self how to do the Vulcan nerve pinch. But there's some really other cool things in here, and lots of references. There's his pet, Ichia, or Ichea, I think that's how he says it, which there is references to that in other places. So that the name of this, there was a city, a Vulcan city, which later got put into the remastered Amok Time. And
I think it also appears in Star Trek Enterprise, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So what was presented in the cartoon becomes canon, which is very cool.
Yeah, it is.
And do you remember who wrote this episode?
This episode was written by D.C. Fontana.
Okay.
It's the only one she wrote for the animated series.
Really?
Yes.
So she served as the showrunner, but she only wrote the one.
Only wrote the one.
Oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's cool. I looked at One of Our Planets is Missing, and this was written by Mark Daniels. He directed 15 original series episodes, including some really good ones like Doomsday Machine, Mirror Mirror, The Changeling, Space Seed, Court Martial, The Naked Time, and the first one to air, which was Mantrap. So this episode basically is about the crew of the Enterprise. They have to stop a living cloud from consuming planets, and it's basically headed for Federation space. In particular, it's headed for a world known as Mantilles that has millions of inhabitants, and of course, it's going to be really bad if the cloud goes there and eats them all. Interesting. We have actually a guest role or a guest character that was also a guest character on the original series. The governor of the planet Mantilles is Commodore Bob Wesley. Commodore Bob Wesley, if you remember in the episode The Ultimate Computer, he captained one of the starships that the Ultimate Computer was engaged in war games with.
Right.
So I thought that was neat. Bob Wesley makes a comeback. Bob Wesley is voiced by not the actor who first played him. That actor was Barry Russo. He is voiced by who?
Scotty.
Jimmy Doohan. That's
Jimmy
right.
Doohan.
Yep. Well, the Enterprise intercepts the cloud. They actually enter the cloud. They realize once they're in the cloud that it has sort of a biology. It has different areas like a body would. And Spock is able to mind meld, and he's able to tell the cloud, hey, look, you might not be able to detect us. We're little, but we're alive, and we think, and there are things on that planet, and please don't eat anybody else. There's a neat scene in here, though, where Kirk is like, you know what? We're going to have to kill this thing. If we can't find a way to stop it, we're going to have to kill it. And he says to Bones, I once said man rose above primitiveness by vowing, I will not kill today. And this is a direct reference to a Kirk speech in the TOS episode, A Taste of Armageddon.
Yeah.
When he's telling them at the end of the episode, hey, look, yeah, we're all savages, but we just have to say to each other, I will not kill today. I thought that was very cool.
That is.
Very cool that they call back one of the original series episodes. The Cloud voice is played by Majel Barrett, so she has another role in this too. But that is one of our planets is missing.
My next one is the Terratin Incident. Rough story here is that the Enterprise is on a mapping mission. They come across an outdated Terran transmission. They didn't say Federation transmission. They said Terran transmission.
Oh, as in Earth.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Pieces together there. And it seems to be coming from this volcanic planet, Cepheus. Now, this planet is like a crystalline planet, but there's a lot of volcanic activity going on. They're looking at the planet, kind of trying to see what's going on, where the transmission came from, trying to pinpoint it. And then a flash of light from the planet passes through the ship. And in the process, it disables the dilithium crystals, basically breaks them down. And so the power, the ship's power is, depleted.
And that's a bad day when you're in the middle of space.
Yeah. But then the crew starts to shrink. And one line is, Kirk is like, Spock, are you slouching? I've never slouched a day in my life. So they can't figure out what's going on. They got the science down of what's happening. The molecules are, between the atoms is reducing, but so they're keeping the same weight or mass, ironically. I don't know how they were moving as they shrunk, but kind of interesting science they added there. So Kirk, they decide before everybody gets too small, Kirk beams down to the planet to try and pinpoint the location of this. He finds a lost Earth colony, who they're called the Terratins, and they've been affected by the same thing. It's some kind of unusual radiation that the planet's giving off.
Are they little too? I don't remember this episode. Are they also little? Okay, so they're shrunken.
They're little. They shrunk when they got to the planet. They couldn't get back because they didn't have the technology.
They're little. What are they gonna do? They're little.
So they built, and they've been there for several generations. They built a city. Now they're in dire need because the planet's starting to act up. It's volcanic, and their civilization's threatened. And long story short, the transporter makes the crew of the Enterprise bigger, but it can't for the Terratins because they don't have the pattern in their computers for the transporters. That's how they do it. They get the crew enlarged, but they save the planet and they relocate it to another planet that's safe. And of course, they're small little creatures. So some production notes on this. So Jimmy Doohan, how many voices he did? He did 4.
Did he really?
Yeah, he did the typical Scotty, Eric's, another crew member, Gabler, and then Mendat of the Terratins. He was basically the leader.
He's so good.
He is. Majel Barrett did 3 voices. The writing credit for this was Paul Schneider. Paul, this is the only animated series he did, but he did 2 original series, Squire of Gothos and Balance of Terror.
Oh, cool. Very cool.
So that's the Terratin Incident.
Well, I looked at More Tribbles, More Troubles. And, of course, that's written by David Gerrold. David Gerrold wrote the original series episode, The Trouble with Tribbles. In this episode, Cyrano Jones comes back. Remember Cyrano Jones?
The dastardly guy.
Yes, and he had the big pockets that he hid drinks in. Anyway, Cyrano Jones comes back, and he brings with him Tribbles. When Cyrano Jones transports aboard, and he's got Tribbles at his feet, there's a great line by Scotty, and he says, "Oh, Captain, it's Cyrano Jones, and he's got Tribbles." And then they show a close-up of the Tribbles, and he goes, "Tribbles!" Anyway, and the Klingons are attacking the Enterprise. Why? They're really not after the Enterprise. They're after Cyrano Jones. Because Cyrano Jones has with him a natural Tribble predator called a Glomma. They want the Glomma because Klingons hate Tribbles. They don't like Tribbles.
I don't understand that.
I know, go figure. Jimmy Doohan again plays more voices than just Scotty. He plays the voice of Captain Koloth. If you remember that, he was the captain in The Trouble with Tribbles in the original series. This episode was actually proposed by David Gerrold in the 3rd season of the original series. If you remember, Gene Roddenberry had moved on, and Fred Freiberger was the producer. Freiberger hated The Trouble with Tribbles. Hated that episode.
How could you hate Tribbles?
I know, go figure. And so he did not want to do another Tribble episode. So Gerald's script went in the trash heap. This was also the last of 3 episodes in which the entire cast got together to record together in the studio.
Wait, so it's animated. You don't record together for animated shows.
They did 3 episodes. This one, Beyond the Farthest Star, and Yesteryear. The whole cast was together and recorded together. But from this point forward, you're right. They just come in and record their individual parts. Here's a little bit of trivia. During the episode, Kirk tells a very young, thin ensign to go seal off that area. And he's in the transporter room. Well, that ensign is supposed to be David Gerrold. When he wrote The Trouble with Tribbles, he actually wrote a cameo in for himself. But he was pretty young and pretty thin at the time. And so the director did not let him go on camera. And so this was a way for him to sort of, be in an episode.
That's funny.
Isn't that awesome?
That is.
You might also remember that the Tribbles in the original series were brown, mottled brownish color. In the animated series, they're pink. There's a reason for that. Hal Sutherland, the director, was colorblind. Well, he was also doing some of the inking, and he thought he was making them light gray, but actually made them pink.
Gosh. That is funny.
That's a funny story. So that's why there are big Tribbles.
Poor Hal.
I know.
Because he's colorblind.
That's awesome. We are going to talk about Hal Sutherland and his colored blindness yet one more time next week when we look at a pink spaceship. The robot grain freighters that we see at the beginning of the episode, well, they kind of get a new life later on. In the remastered original series DVD set, there are a couple of episodes where you will see that ship design, these robot grain freighters, either beside or in the background behind the Enterprise. So they get added into the remastered, and when that happens, well, they're sort of canon now, which is kind of cool.
That is cool.
And there is a company by the name of Eagle Moss right now that is creating this very vast Starship collectible line. They're going to be doing over 90, actually I should say that it's more like 110 different ships. One of the ships that they're doing is the grain freighter from the animated series. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
There's a great line in this by Scotty. I mentioned earlier, Tribbles. Well, there's another one. He says, "But Captain, we've got Tribbles on the ship, Quinto Triticali in the corridors, and Klingons in the quadrant. It can ruin your whole day, sir."
You've been practicing that, haven't you?
A little bit. It still wasn't very good, I know. What's really neat about this episode, though, is how it ends. Of course, Scotty gets him again, and he beams the Tribbles over to the Klingons who are stuck with the Tribbles.
Again.
That is more troubles. That is
More trouble?
That is more Tribbles, more troubles. And the next episode, sir.
The next episode I'll be talking about is the Ambergris Element.
Ooh, cool.
The story of the Ambergris Element revolves around a water planet. Now, usually we see in Star Trek, they're more desert or rocky terrain type things. This is a water planet, and they land on this planet in an aqua shuttle.
I always thought that was cool. I mean, I remember watching this as a kid going, "Oh, man, they got an aqua shuttle? Looks like a speedboat. That's cool."
Where is the toy? I want the toy.
Right, exactly. I thought, wow, they've got something for everything on that ship.
So they land on this water planet, obviously on water, and this Sur snake attacks them almost immediately and grabs Kirk and Spock and drags them under the water. The crew's looking for them everywhere. Suddenly they find them on the shore, but they've been changed. They've got gills and webbing on their fingers, and I don't know about their toes. I don't think they show their toes.
Let's just assume it's on their toes.
It will assume. I mean, any good aqua person would have webbing.
Just a little.
And since they have gills, they're having trouble breathing because they're out in the open air. They get them back to the Enterprise. Of course, they rig an aquarium for them.
And because everybody's got the stuff for an aquarium on a starship.
Right.
They've got the transparent aluminum stored somewhere else over there. They've got all the water you could ever need. Yeah, let's build an aquarium.
Yeah, why not? And they talk in, they, of course, Bones can't figure out how to change them back. It's beyond the technology that Federation has. And Kirk's, take us back down to the planet. I'm not going to live in an aquarium. So they go to the planet to investigate. In the water, they can move about freely. They find a city. And as soon as they find the city, they're taken prisoner by Aquans.
That's a very unique name for this episode, I have to admit. Very original.
It is.
Somebody was thinking.
Don't know where they had to drive that from.
They couldn't have been hydrants.
No,
H2Oans. Waterians.
Wet people.
People with webs. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
With these Aquans, they fear air breathers. Of course, this is an outdated thought. They've been down there for a while. It's the old people that think that way. The young people don't. The young people are the ones who found Spock and Kirk.
Oh, I get it. Like the young people in the 60s and 70s were hip.
Yes.
Oh, I see what he's doing there. Okay, gotcha.
The young Aquans.
Who wrote this episode, Cal? Do you remember?
The writer of this episode was Margaret Arman. She did the Lorelei Signal, the animated series we talked about last time. Mm-hmm. And she wrote 3 original series, The Cloudminders, Paradise Syndrome, and The Gamesters of Triskelion. So I'll speed up the conclusion a bit. They find an ancient city that has the lost technology to revert them back to air breathers. They go back to normal, but some of the young Aquans, they want to try and be air breathers, so they convert themselves, and there's a little moral at the end of this one, which is don't be afraid of the air breathers just because they're different.
Come on, jump into the air. It's warm. The air is wonderful. Come on in. There's room for everyone.
James Doohan did 6 voices, including Scotty and RX, Lieutenant RX. Majel Barrett did 3. Now, there was one notable addition here. Lou Scheimer. He voiced 2 different characters on this. Now, Lou was a famous producer and voice actor for many cartoons going way, way back. But his more notable produced cartoons, which in the 70s and 80s, were She-Ra, Ghostbusters, He-Man, and Jason of Star Command.
Well, I looked at The Survivor, written by James Schmierer. He also wrote for shows like Daniel Boone and The High Chaparral and a show called Chase in the 70s. The Survivor is about the Enterprise. It finds a famous humanitarian, Carter Winston, and he has been thought to be dead for the last 5 years. But as he's walking around the Enterprise and people were happy to see him, he's acting a little suspicious. And so it turns out that Carter Winston is not actually Carter Winston at all, but he is a dirty shapeshifter, part of the race called Vendorians. And Vendorians are not to be trusted. That's in quotes. I just did the air quote things with my fingers.
I saw that.
Thank you. Yeah. Nichelle Nichols plays Uhura, and she also plays one of the crew named Ann Norrid. And Ann had a relationship with Carter Winston years ago. And so she's a little suspicious of the Vendorian. Majel Barrett plays, obviously, Nurse Chapel. She also plays Lieutenant Maress. Remember the cat lady? Yeah. And then she also plays the voice of the Enterprise computer. And Jimmy Doohan again plays Scotty, as well as the voice of a Klingon captain. Now, this episode had a guest voice, which is very rare in the Star Trek animated series. Scotty, Jimmy Doohan did most of the voices, or Nichelle Nichols, or Majel Barrett. But Ted Knight stepped in and voiced Carter Winston and the Vendorian. Ted Knight at the time was very famous playing Ted Baxter on Mary Tyler Moore. And so the fact that he sort of stepped in and did this this guest voice, and he was uncredited, by the way, he received no credit for doing it, is kind of cool. It's kind of interesting. This is also the only episode in which Dr. McCoy's daughter, Joanna, is mentioned. In later Star Trek novels, Joanna will be mentioned and stories will be written about her, but this is the first time that the idea of McCoy's daughter comes up. Here, she was supposed to be featured, that's right, in a Star Trek The Original Series episode, The Way to Eden. But she got thrown out. It was dropped. Uhura appears, but she doesn't have any lines. So Nichelle Nichols also voices Ann Norrid, as I said. And Kirk is giving orders to a new character, Lieutenant Maress. And it's the first time we see her. The episode is also unique because it is the first time we see a really, truly strange and exotic alien, a non-humanoid alien. The Vendorian is like It's a bunch of tentacles with a sack on top. And as the Vendorian is talking to you, the tentacles can't help it. They're whipping around the room and, they're flying all over. And he's carrying on a very, casual conversation with you, but the tentacles are flying all over the place. It was a little disturbing, and I found myself restless after watching that.
Well, don't invade his personal space.
No, don't want to do that. The episode also depicts, for the first time, the Enterprise, the Constitution-class Enterprise, simultaneously firing phasers and photon torpedoes. We never saw that in the original series, and it's the first time after the original series that we get to see the ship doing that.
I looked at the Pirates of Orion. Now, you look at the title of that. I did not mispronounce it if you listen to the episode.
Yeah,
Orion is pronounced Orion.
Time out here, because in the original series, we call them Orion pirates.
Yes.
What the hell was going on here? Did they forget that it was Orion pirates?
They're the same Orion pirates, but they're Orion.
Come on, chat. I expect you to hold up the standards here, dude. You know it's Orion.
Yep. So this was written actually by the youngest person to ever write a Star Trek episode up to that point.
Jimmy Orion?
No, it was Howard Weinstein. So Howard's 19 years old. He actually submitted it for the first season of the animated series, and it was he never heard back. So then he had a agent who submitted under his name. So basically put a name behind it, and they took it, and he actually, it was the first episode of the second season of the animated series.
So he had to wait a little while.
Yes. But he was a junior in college at the time, and 19 years old.
That builds character. Wait a little longer.
This was the only...
I'm going to be that guy that yells at the kids in the neighborhood. Get off my lawn. Sorry. Go ahead.
You've been threatening that for 25 years. This is the only thing he wrote for the series. He did write several other Star Trek books, Marvel Comics for DS9 and Voyager. All right. So the story. Oh, let me get into Jimmy Doohan. So he did 5 voices. Majel Barrett did 3.
Jeez.
George Takei did 2. And Norm Prescott, who was a guest voice, he did 1.
He was a producer at Filmation.
Yes, he was.
Cool.
The Enterprise is stricken with an outbreak of chorecytosis.
Oh, I hate it. I had that last winter. It was horrible. I had this cough that wouldn't go away. It was bad.
Yeah. And fortunately, it's not that harmful for humans. But the problem is with that darn copper-based blood, it's fatal for Vulcans. So there's the drama. Now they got to go get the drug to cure him. Unfortunately, the drug is days away, and there's no way they're going to get there. So they come up with this scheme plan to get it kind of passed to them, have a local starship get it from whatever planet it is and bring it to meet them halfway or whatever. Well, guess what starship picks it up? The Potemkin.
Ah, okay.
So the starship Potemkin works its way, the cure works its way to another ship which gets hijacked by Orion pirates. The Orion pirates really are after probably the dilithium crystals. The Enterprise and Kirk, Kirk does his negotiation, says he's not going to turn them in, just give us the cure. The Orions don't really trust him, come up with a scheme to self-destruct themselves and the Enterprise to cover their tracks and not get the Orions in trouble with the Federation. Of course, Scotty saves the day, and he takes the bomb and transports it out of the way, and he's the hero.
Thank God for Scotty.
Thank God for Scotty. He's the best.
That freaking Enterprise would be in shambles if it weren't for Scotty. All right, I looked at Once Upon a Planet, and it was written by Chuck Menville. Menville also wrote for a lot of different Saturday morning kids shows in the 70s and 80s. Some of the names from the 70s you might recognize include Sabrina and the Groovy Ghoulies.
My favorite.
I know. That was so good. I loved Sabrina. The Flintstones Comedy Hour. I watched this one a lot. Speed Buggy. Remember Speed Buggy?
Yes.
Shazam. Hong Kong Phooey. ISIS. Arc 2. The New Adventures of Batman. And Jason of Star Command. And the list goes on and on. This guy was prolific with kids shows. So he gets to write an episode for the animated series. Here's what happens. Upon returning to the amusement park planet that we first saw in the original series episode Shore Leave, the crew of the Enterprise finds that the computer, the computer that generates all the stuff that interacts with you, the robots and the guns and all that fun stuff that you want. Well, that computer, it's gone crackers. The caretaker is dead. He's nowhere to be found, and the computer wants to steal the Enterprise and seek out its brother computers. And so it spends some time moving itself into the Enterprise computer so it can steal the ship and fly away. And the crew ends up very calmly, I might add, very calmly and compassionately talking the computer into accepting its role on the vacation planet. And then you could have other people talk to you when they come visit. James Doohan, again, plays lots of characters along with Scotty. He plays Eric's. He plays, yes, there's a white rabbit that Alice chases. Gabler and the master computer voice, that's all Jimmy Doohan. And Nichelle Nichols plays Uhura and Alice of, Alice in Wonderland. And Majel Barrett plays Lieutenant Maress and the Queen of Hearts, also from Alice in Wonderland. This is one of the few times in any Star Trek episode that a Federation starship is shown with seat belts.
Seat belts?
Seat belts. You remember how we would watch the original series as kids and everybody would fly all over the bridge? And at some point, maybe after seeing the run of the series 4 times, you said to yourself, how come they don't have any seat belts? Well, they show them in the animated series.
I thought they just had magnets in their butts.
Oh, that was a great idea. I like that idea. Yeah, okay. The voice that Jimmy Doohan uses to play the computer on the planet here, it is the same voice that he used to portray the M5 Multitronic computer in the original series episode, The Ultimate Computer. So Jimmy Doohan's got a computer voice, and he's sticking to it. And then, of course, during the episode, Kirk and Spock are cornered by a giant cat. And this is the second time that's happened to these characters. The first being during the original series in the episode Cat Spa. And that, we all know that was such a stellar episode.
It was. It was one of my least favorites.
Favorites. Very, yes. And this episode is also one of the first times, or I should say, the first time that we see the interior of the Enterprise's hangar deck in the animated series. So we see it for the first time here in Once Upon a Planet. Wow. Stellar stuff. That's stuff.
Awesome. All right. Well, next week, we're going to look at the remaining 8 episodes as we draw to a close our series on the animated series. See you then.
Thanks for listening to 70s Trek, an independent fan production. Join us next week as we explore more about the production, the actors, the producers, and the influencers of Star Trek in the lost decade of the 1970s on 70s Trek.